Hello and welcome to FP Live. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. It is well known now that President-elect Donald Trump likes tariffs. He has called it the most beautiful word in the dictionary. And on the campaign trail, he has talked about tariffs of 20% on goods from most countries and 60% on China. Now, tariffs have trade-offs. They generate revenue and they can encourage domestic production. They can be deployed as statecraft against adversaries, but they also do cause inflation and they often hurt lower income families more than the rich. When I speak with leaders and business people around the world, the aspect of Trump's second term they worry about the most is tariffs. And much of it is because of the uncertainty around it. Will Trump put in place blanket 20% tariffs? Less? More? Will there be carve-outs for friends? Is it just a negotiating tactic? A lot of that is stuff that we will find out in January and beyond. Now, many economists have warned against dramatic increases in tariffs. We've had some of those very economists on this program. So we thought it would be useful to hear from an economist who's been making a different case and who is seen as immensely influential with a new generation of Republican senators, such as Josh Hawley and Tom Cotton, and also VP-elect J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, the presumptive next Secretary of State. Oren Cass is the founder and chief economist of American Compass, a conservative economic think tank. He is also the author of The Once and Future Worker, a vision for the renewal of work in America. Oren Cass, welcome to FP Live.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So just to get one thing out of the way, you are an economist, you are also a conservative, but you do not speak for Trump. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Help to run a think tank, and we advise anyone anywhere on the political spectrum who cares to listen to what we think.
And then I should also add your work is followed by a lot of people very influential in Trump's orbit. You also wrote a chapter of Project 2025, which, as we know, Trump first disavowed, but now it seems to be back in favor. Is that right?
Well, I was a contributor to one of the chapters, so among the hundreds who were in this case working on the labor chapter and some of those ideas.
Yeah, great. So just wanted to clarify all of that. So as you know, I want to have a broader conversation about the American economy, but I'd like to begin with tariffs. So technically, a tariff is a form of a sales tax, and US tariffs have fallen pretty consistently from the 1940s all the way, I think, to about 2016, when Trump was elected for the first time. Explain to us, Oren, what the reversal of this trend is solving for.
Well, I think the problem that we've seen over that full period, but really over the last 25 years or so, since sort of full-on globalization, China's entry into the WTO, is that free trade has not worked at all the way that most economists predicted, especially if you go back around to the period around the year 2000. They made a great deal of noise about how this was a unanimous view of all economists that free trade with China would be a wonderful benefit for the United States, for workers, and for the strength of the economy. And we obviously lowered tariffs, lowered barriers on that basis. And the result has not been those things that were promised. It has been in many cases the reverse. Certainly, we do have more cheap stuff in the United States. But I think the vast majority of Americans would rightly say it has not on net been beneficial. And so we have this conflict now where a lot of economists are still using those exact same models. And unsurprisingly, there are models that said that this would be a wonderful benefit, say that going in the other direction would have costs that exceed the benefits. Once you realize and admit that those models were wrong, they got the trade-off backward, you can't continue to use those models to argue against going the other way. You have to recognize that if we made the wrong choice and made the wrong trade-off, then going the other way on that is going to benefit the people we need to be focused on, who are those who have been left behind.
And so, Oren, if I may, tariffs and policies and the needs of people evolve over time, right? So it could be that the way the United States championed free trade in the 60s and 70s and 80s worked then, and then, over time they began to work less. But where I want to go with one aspect of this is, let's say, we can agree that many of the market forces of the last 40 years, so globalization, urbanization, the impact of technology, free trade, all of that stuff, it had some positive impacts, and we now know that it has had some negative impacts. But if tariffs are in effect a sales tax, don't they make goods more expensive for the very consumer who has been most impacted by all of these market forces?
Well, first of all, I should say I disagree with your inclusion of technology in that list. I don't think it's right to point the finger at technology. I think, frankly, that's exactly what economists do to avoid acknowledging the role that economic policy has played in these challenges.
Hmm.
If anything, our problem on the technology front is we're not seeing enough innovation. Productivity growth is slowing down. In the manufacturing sector, productivity growth has reversed. We are becoming less productive in the United States in manufacturing at this point.
I guess
So
what I meant by technology, or and if I may, is the hollowing out of societies, especially in rural parts of not just America, but all countries. If you look at the rise of, say, big tech and what that has done to mom and pop stores, what it has done to community, that's the aspect of it I was sort of bucketing in with urbanization and globalization.
sure, no,
Well,
that's fair enough. And obviously technological change is occurring over broad periods of time, including those that have worked out best for working families. The sales tax point, I think it's also important to note, is a sort of point of political rhetoric, not a useful economic analysis. And I think the best contrast here is a carbon tax. You'll have to tell me if you've ever heard an economist say, well, technically a carbon tax is a sales tax. I'm pretty sure no one no one has ever said that because they're trying to sell a carbon tax.
hmm.
And so I don't disagree with your point that there will be an effect on prices, and we can certainly talk more about that. I think it's just really important to recognize that as a matter of economic analysis, when we recognize things in the market that market prices are not taking into account, and whether that is pollution of various forms, or in this instance, I would argue the value of making things, the fact that domestic industrial capacity has enormous implications for a labor market, for an economy, for national security, none of which market prices are going to consider. If we say, actually, we need to essentially insert a wedge into that price that is going to reflect those costs or those benefits, yes, there will potentially be an effect on prices, but we don't just call that a sales tax and say that it's going to be inflationary, except if we, for ideological reasons, don't like tariffs, and then off we go down that rhetorical path. So I do think precision in the language is actually really important. And I think the way that we have to understand tariffs is as a recognition that making things does matter. And that's something that economists have resisted acknowledging for a very long time. Some still won't admit. A lot at this point are starting to admit it because it is such an unsustainable position to argue the reverse. But if making things matters, if domestic production matters, then in fact, the market price in which we just buy cheap subsidized stuff from China is not the efficient price. It's not the one that's actually going to maximize welfare, growth, any of the things economists talk about in the long run.